So let's open by going around, and for each of you, I just want to hear how you define leadership, so we can set the stage moving forward. Let's start with Lori. Let's start with you on this one.
Okay. Well, I agree with you completely that I don't think there really is a common definition of leadership. There's so many different ways to think about it, and so many different styles of leadership can actually be effective. So I just defined it super simply. You're a leader if people follow you. Whatever your title, whatever your authority in an organization, really doesn't matter. You can be a formal or informal leader. If people are following you, you're a leader. And because of all the different styles, I actually think it's really important for companies and organizations to define their idea of what leadership is. I think a lot of decisions are made about who is a leader and who isn't based on an internal set of definitions that's not necessarily shared.
Yes, to everything Lori said. I think leadership is a way of living, a way of leaving people with inspiration, clarity, courage for forward action. I think it begins with the person, not the position, that it has little to do with your level of authority and everything to do with your level of with your influence, which happens no matter your title. For me, when I think about the question, like in my heart, I think leadership is connected in times of crisis or uncertainty, especially. It's connected for me to where can you feel like safety and calm and direction in a storm that gets you to safety, like that you can look to and listen to and be guided to safety. And I think, that's where self-leadership comes in, but also if we're looking at external leadership, it's like, where am I finding safety, calm, and guidance in the storm? So those are some of my thoughts.
I like the safety, calm, and guidance. I often have a phrase, which is the leader needs to be the eye of the storm. So if you as a leader can pull that from yourself, that sense of calm and clarity, and be the eye of the storm, it's really helpful for the people around you.
Yeah. What about you, Mo? How do you define leadership?
Oh, thanks, Craig. I was just thinking about that idea of like the eye of the storm. And I was thinking about these times and how it might feel some leaders. I think sometimes I'm feeling this myself, that I may want to be the eye of the storm. Like I love that idea of like this calm, centered presence. And then I also think about the times when I'm flipping out, because I too am scared, and so for me, what I think, how I think I would answer the question that you asked, Craig, is that for me, leadership is relationship. It's a relationship between a leader and a follower. And I agree with what's been said. I love what you were saying, Meredith and Lori, both around. It's not the same as a title of leader. And yet I think in our modern world of business, we think about leadership and management as the same. And we give people titles and then we assume that because they have the title without any practice or any training that they should be able to lead. And it's the only professional track that we do that for, by the way. Like we don't take professional musicians and athletes and just tell them now that they are a tennis player, they should be able to win the Olympics or whatever. And so I find that interesting because we imply that there's no practice. But so I've always thought of leadership actually as a relationship. Daniel Goleman's work, which you mentioned, Craig, in emotional intelligence really convinced me of that, as did an early grad school professor of mine who said it this way. He said, there's really two questions that matter in leadership. Who am I and who am I with you? Which I think is so powerful. His name was Ed Tomey. He's now deceased. But I also have grown to love in recent years Brene Brown's definition as a certified facilitator in her work. I can't help but think about that. She defines a leader as simply anyone who can see the potential in people and processes and who has the courage to activate that potential. And I love that definition partly because it picks up that process piece, which I think is an important dimension of leadership as well. And it kind of goes back to that eye of the storm idea where there are the people that I want to influence through my relationship, but sometimes there's also the process itself, the structure, the way that we make decisions with our stakeholders. So I agree, it's complex, but I find that I do best when I think about it primarily as a relationship.
I love that. Yeah.
Craig, can I jump on something that
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to jump on that you said that leaders are freaking out, and it's one thing to act as the calm in the storm, but I just think it's really valuable to highlight the permission for leaders, because all of us and everybody listening is a leader. And it's not like, oh, in order to be a leader, I need to have my stuff together. It's like, no, we don't. We are like human beings who have all of the human experience going on. And I think this is where, for me, that permission, like real leadership, starts with giving ourselves permission to have our own humanity, to have compassion for ourselves, to not have it all tied up in a bow and looking good. And that as a starting point is not only like of value for ourselves as leaders, but of meaningful value for all the people that we influence.
Mm-hmm. Well, just to keep that conversation going, is kind of an interesting one. Just because you're the eye of the storm doesn't mean you're not authentic and who you are. And the eye of the storm can be kind of messy, right? Because remember, to get to the eye of the storm has to pass over you, or you have to pass through it. So by the time you get there, your hair's, and it's not like you're, a monk on the temple.
And to me, that has to do with acknowledging that believing in ourselves doesn't mean that we're kicking it all the time, just like you both were just saying. I think it doesn't mean we're always on our A game. It means we are human, and that we get grounded in being enough. So I don't have to be a hero leader. I don't have to be the end all be all to be good enough to lead in my environment. And for me, that helps me, because I mess up too as a leader with my team, and I sometimes feel inadequate, right?
Meredith, Lori, do you ever mess up? Hands up. No.
Oh yeah. I actually think people confuse confidence with being right. So as a leader, you're not required to be right. And in fact, better leaders are wrong a lot. So it's really simple, that it's a separation between being right and having that sense of internal space or confidence or whatever. And I think one of the ways leadership really works is in a post-heroic approach, where you are not the hero. You actually make the people around you the hero.
Hero's journey. I like that. Servant leadership, lead from behind, right? It's so interesting. Yeah. Okay, let's switch. Let's move into leadership today. Because when I opened up, we talked about the fact that leadership, I think we all agree, has these kind of fundamentals that stay, right? Trust and vision, those sorts of things. But like, leadership is also fluid. And we have moved very quickly into a very new world. Like, we had a humming economy, at least from our perspective, my perspective, and leaders were, our businesses were growing, and then all of a sudden we had a big hit, and everything has shifted. And I feel like we've very quickly moved into a different space. So I want to kind of go around, and the first question to kick this off is, what is different today about leadership? What should we be thinking about differently, and what has changed, and how do we need to the goal is to help others quickly think about what to shift. So I'll start this one with Mo. Let's start with you.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this so much, because I actually wrote a blog recently about, that leadership in a pandemic is just good leadership in all times. And then Craig, you and I started talking about it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I want to, what else would I think about that? And so I have been thinking about it a lot, and I think it's an and both for me. It's a paradox of, yes, I think good leadership in non-pandemic times is also good leadership in pandemic times. What I'm seeing for leaders, especially now, but I think it's probably been true throughout the pandemic, is that the skills required for navigating ambiguity and turbulence are like really highly attenuated. We don't have answers. We don't know when things will open up. We don't know when our companies will be able to make certain decisions, or when people will convene again. And I think that feels to me kind of unprecedented in terms of these times. I mean, it's not unprecedented in history, where we've had world wars, et cetera. But for people of my age or in our lifetimes, one of the times when we've had the least clarity about what the future looks like in terms of business. And for leaders, I think of school leaders, for example, who are trying to make plans for the fall and don't know if their schools will be open, and healthcare leaders who haven't known, are we going to be glutted with patients, or are you going to have empty halls? And I think that's one of the real pushes for leadership right now is how do we navigate ambiguity and turbulence. And the second thing that I think is heightened right now, and we were talking about actually before, is this idea of what I call head and heart habits. Head and heart habits, meaning that we have a high need right now for our cognition, like our ingenuity and our problem solving. How are we going to do business and industry and education and healthcare in these times when we can't do business the way we used to? So it takes a lot of thinking, but I also think it takes a lot of feeling, where we have people that are very anxious, very afraid. We have increased incidence of mental health challenges. And so we have a huge call. We have teams that can't connect because they're not in the physical space. So we don't get any of the emotional limbic brain response we can get in person. So I think what I see for leaders that's a particular call right now is how do we create those heart-based connection dynamics that is heightened, in addition to the challenge of navigating the turbulence and the lack of clarity of answers. Those are a couple things that I think are unique right now. I'd love to know what you guys think as well.
Sure. I actually agree with the leading in the unknown. And from a business perspective, you might have pieces of unknown there, or one area that's unknown. You have data and information from other areas. Like, we're in this novel situation, and there isn't a lot of data and there isn't a lot of information, and you really have to figure out what you need to do, not knowing what the future holds. One thing I think about that is that it's ripe with opportunity. If you don't know what the future holds, you're free to try all kinds of things that are new. And if they fail, well, okay, a whole bunch of things are going to fail. So it doesn't really matter. So here's a great time to fail and learn and try new ways of working, new ways of being, new ways with remote teams. I agree with Mo, like the lack of emotional support from work at home is really a factor for leaders. In the business setting, there are unknown environments that you're in, but often the leader is not as impacted as some of the employees. For example, if you're doing a layoff, yes, that's challenging for the leader, but at the end of the day, the leader still has their job. In this case, leaders are being just as impacted as anybody else in the organization. So having that emotional support's really helpful, not just for employees, but for leaders as well.
If I'm looking for what I can add to the brilliant things already said, which I echo, I think hope. Hope as a concept, and then also hope as an acronym. I think it's something in crisis that we all need and hunger for. And as I was thinking about and talking to many leaders during these last couple of months, the things that stand out, and some of these were said already by Lori and Mo, but are heart, openness, principles, and empathy. So hope, heart. People need to feel understood, not just intellectually and about their work life, but emotionally. And we all need permission to feel challenge and loss and sadness and joy. And as leaders, to model that. And there's such a big gaping difference between focusing on making sure people are doing good work and making sure people are in good shape to do good work. So heart. And then openness, as that second part of hope, and openness to learn, openness, communicating with transparency and clarity, and not having all of the answers, but saying what you do know. The P in hope is principles, having clear guiding principles by which decisions are made, both operating with integrity, but also sharing what those principles are. A couple of you mentioned layoffs that are happening so ubiquitously, and I know many of us have read the Airbnb letter that was shared when 25% of their staff was let go. And Brian, who wrote the letter, laid out his clear guiding principles by which decisions were made. So it wasn't just like, oh, too bad for you, this is the decision and you don't understand why, but having clear guiding principles and sharing them. And then it's been said many times in this call and in this chat, but empathy, making hard decisions and being willing to make the hard decisions, but doing it with love and empathy.